So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're connecting from. To introduce myself, I'm Shashidhar. I'm part of Citrix Ready technical marketing team. Today, we'll talk about how Datrium helps in unlocking the flash-based economics and then user experience for VDI within Open Convergence. From Datrium, we have Andre Lebovici, VP of Solutions and Alliances, and Mike McLaughlin, Director of Technical Marketing, who will walk us through this webinar today. Thanks everyone for attending this webinar, and I would like to welcome you all to the Citrix Ready Technical Webinar series, where we showcase how Citrix and our partners have integrated to deliver valuable products and solutions to common problems faced by our customers today. So to talk about Citrix Ready program, Citrix Ready is an end-to-end technology partner program which showcases and recommends third-party partner products, solutions, and services that demonstrate compatibility with Citrix products. Customers can easily and quickly will be able to find solutions recommended by Citrix in the Citrix Ready marketplace. You could navigate to citrixready.citrix.com and you'll find all the Citrix Ready verified products listed there. So for more information on the Citrix Ready program, please navigate to citrix.com/partnerprograms/Citrix Ready. Before we start the presentation, I would like to mention that we have few poll questions during this webinar. Please answer those. And also we will have a Q&A session at the end so that you can post your questions during the webinar in the questions section in the GoToWebinar with chat window, and we will take those questions at the end in the Q&A session. And we are recording this webinar. Once the webinar is over, we'll post it, and then we'll post it online. We will share the links with you as well. So without any delay, let me welcome Andre. Andre, thanks for joining us. It's all yours.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for joining the webinar today. I really appreciate. Before getting started, I just would like to run through our agenda. So of course I'm going to try to cover a little bit of VDI use cases, why we do it, why we do app remoting, and what we are actually trying to solve with VDI and app remoting. Then I'm going to cover a little bit of Datrium Open Convergence architecture and talk a little bit also about how simple it is and what use cases we try to solve or we solve in enterprises today. Then we're going to move on to Zen Desktop Administration on Datrium. And my colleague, Mike McLaughlin, will take you through some design decisions and some workload performance testing that we've done. And we'll finalize this session today with the design for a 6,000 user Zen Desktop and Zen App Pod on a single Datrium platform. So this is the agenda for today's webinar. So let's get into it. But before we go ahead, we have a polling question. If you could spend.
I've launched the poll question, and the poll question says, if you are planning to deploy or refresh a VDI solution, are you considering a traditional infrastructure like SAN or converged infrastructure like CI, HCI, or OCI, a public cloud-based infrastructure, or already deployed and you're already happy with the results?
That's great. I see some responses already here. Let's give another few seconds. Yeah, it's not surprising the results here. So I see here 60% of the attendees are actually planning to use traditional infrastructure, SAN. 20% are considering, 27% are considering some form of convergent infrastructure, HCI, or open converged in the case of Datrium. And 9% actually looking at public cloud-based solution. Very interesting. It seems that there is a heavy bias towards SAN still, and we'll cover that a little bit in this presentation. Great, thank you. So, of course, VDI has been around for a long time, also app promoting. And there are some key use cases that we have been pitching over the years as we evolve the whole story about end-user computing and mobility. So the first one is, of course, desktop transformation. Simplify management of desktops across organizations, being able to centralize, simplify patch management, and this central image management. There's also green initiatives. How do you reduce carbon footprint? You save on energy. This is what we call the desktop transformation buckets. The second one is mobility, and this is more prevalent nowadays than it was probably 5-10 years ago. There's a lot of people working from home. In some industries like healthcare, mobile access is becoming very prevalent. Doctors need to go from bed to bed, and they need to be able to be in constant communication with their patients in hospitals. And also, bring your own device initiatives has also been a major driving force to enable mobility. Nowadays, I don't think companies have been enforcing devices as much as used to in the past. Here at Datum, we all have choice to bring your own devices, and we can choose what we want. And of course, IT doesn't have the capabilities of managing and maintaining all sorts of devices across the organization. So bring your own device is becoming more prevalent in large organizations. The third use case is governance, having your desktop centralized and being able to enforce those standards and patch management aligns well with the business objectives around governance and some regulatory compliance frameworks out there like HIPAA and HITECH and Sarbanes-Oxley, PCI DSS. VDI, because it's centralized and enables you to manage everything as a single unified entity, really help with governance and compliance. Security, there has been a lot of discussion around security for VDI. Should VDI and App Promoter be sort of a security, an option for organizations? Well, it's not so much only security, but there is definitely a security play when deploying VDI. Protect sensitive data. You can have desktops or applications that can only access data inside your organization. Can allow you to access via VPN. In some cases, we've been working with some media vendors who are producing large files like CAD/CAM and images, where it's just not viable to move those images around. So having VDI in that sense also helps because it's a centralized access. And of course, business continuity. And many organizations have VDI also as a way to keep workers effectively working, even if there is a disaster, if the data center is down, if there is a natural disaster, they need to be able to access their desktop and applications. You see organizations like Red Cross providing desktops across the globe using VDI. So those are the key VDI use cases that we see out there. And what we do at Datum is provide a platform that enables you to have all these use cases in a single unified solution. But why Datum? I'm going to go very quickly over this slide because we do talk about all that during the presentation. So it's simple, it's integrated with vCenter. There's no knobs or buttons to tune or to configure. So it simplifies the life of the administrator. We do provide a better user experience with Flash and NVMe acceleration, with the concept of data locality, so the reads are always local to the servers. We do also support NVIDIA GPUs. You can bring your own servers into the solution. At the end of the day, all those things enhancing the user experience. And I like to say that they also enhance the user acceptance the better the experience, the users will be happier and they'll be more than happy to use your VDI solution. Also, zero infrastructure risk. You pay as you grow or you pay as you go, which is sort of like the cloud model. You start with one server and one data node. I'll explain all that later. And then as you grow your footprint, the number of desktops, the number of applications, you just add more compute and more capacity if required. And we've now partnered with Login VSI to do all this baseline tests to make sure that it will provide you confidence on performance and scalability. On the security side, we have full encryption. I'm going to talk a little bit about that towards the end of the presentation. But when you're looking at HIPAA, high-tech, SOX, PCM compliance, we have something that will help you to achieve those. And predictable pricing and predictable growth, because it's a pay-as-you-grow model anyway. So those are the core reasons why. Let me go a little bit over what we do from a partnership and ecosystem perspective. Of course, Citrix is a big partner. We are Citrix ready for ZenDesktop and ZenApp. ZenDesktop and ZenApp also run on top of VMware. We are also VMware ready. We have partnership with Login VSI for benchmark and validation, and we also have other vendors out there that we partner with. They're not in the slides, but they are in the VDI space as well. From a company perspective, we've been having record adoption. Our message resonates really well with customers doing VDI app remoting, but also with different types of workloads. And as of now, we have customers in the most diverse verticals in the market, and including some Fortune 100 companies out there. So if you're considering VDI, you should really look at Datrium, as many of the companies here are doing VDI and virtualization with us. Right, so let me get into the infrastructure, or what we actually provide. So Datrium is a primary and secondary workload infrastructure. So we offer a virtualization platform that works with VMware and also works with Red Hat and CentOS KVM, so you can run your VMs, your VDI. And we also offer the primary storage that runs with Flash, either SSDs or NVMe. And we also converge the secondary storage, or what you use like a backup server, proxy server, the catalog, when accelerators in a single solution for all types of workloads. I know we are focusing here VDI and app remoting, but the infrastructure lends itself very well for data warehouse and archival and recovery. There's a lot of different use cases that we can be used for. So this architecture is an evolution of what you know as hyperconverged. So we are simpler than hyperconverged. So without any administration effort, no knobs, no controller bottlenecks, we enable you to scale capacity and performance in different dimensions, which is not possible with hyperconvergence. So if you think about a SAN as an example, the first day is the best day. You have the best performance with a SAN. As you move forward, you add more VDI or more workloads there, the SAN will get slower, and then you end up having to add another SAN. You're going to manage that is at different silos. With us, you can scale compute and capacity independent. And the way we do that is we add Flash and NVMe on the servers, so the data always remain local, and we have a copy of the data in what we call a data pool. So we have this concept of a data node that scales out linearly to more than to up to 10 nodes today. So we enable you also to bring your existing environment into the solution. You can bring your your own servers if you have HP or Dell servers, anything that is supported in the VMware HCL or Red Hat HCL you can bring, and the servers will remain stateless. So in the same time, we really enjoyed because we were able to fail over VMs to a different server, and there was no data resiliency, there was no data at risk, which is not the case in the HCI solutions. From a performance perspective, we are faster than our flash arrays because the reads are all local to the server with those drives, NVMe and flash on the servers. And for writes, we go one write is local, and a copy of the write for resilience and the redundancy, of course, is erasure coded across those data nodes. So when we look at cost, we also much cheaper than our flash arrays and also than HCI. Management, zero management. So we built this product believing that everything should work natively. So we have data reduction, like compression, deduplication, erasure coding. It's always on all the time. There's not even a option to turn it off. And in many cases, this is really important because if you're managing just few VMs, okay, you know what is good for certain types of workloads. But if you're managing hundreds or thousands of VMs, what do you do? How do you manage? Should we enable compression, deduplication, erasure coding? It just becomes very cumbersome to manage all that. And finally, we eliminate also backup silos, have one UI that you manage everything. It slaps into vCenter, HTML5, or if you're running with KVM as an example, you access it natively without vCenter, of course. And the solution was actually purpose-built as a backup system as well. So the primary data always living on the servers, being accessed from the servers, and a copy of the data and the snapshots living in this data node cluster. When you buy from us, as I mentioned, you can either buy the servers from us, or you can bring your own existing environment into the solution. And this is really important. If you buy from us, it becomes like a turnkey compute. So it just slap into our solution, and it will work natively. If you bring your own servers, you need to install what we call the hyperdriver into your server, into vCenter, and it will enable the seamless integration into the solution. From a server's perspective, scalability, it goes from 1 server to 128 servers. We call it compute nodes. And from 1 data node to 10 data nodes. And I'm going to get a little bit into what that means from a scalability perspective, because obviously you can start with 1 compute node and 1 data node, and you move from there in a pay-as-you-grow fashion. Okay. So why is it simpler than HCI? So first of all, it's integrated into your standard operations tools like vCenter. It looks and feels seamless. All the management of the VMs are VM based. So there are no LANs, no other array artifacts to manage. We provide native VM analytics with over 6,000 metrics across VMs, like SSD IOPS, throughput, latency, real-time and historical data. We do have the same benefits as hyperconvergence created, which is the one-click software upgrade, firmware upgrades for the data node and also for the compute nodes. When you buy the compute nodes from Datrium, you can always bring your own existing investment. And many customers ask me, can I use Datrium with my new compute nodes in my old environment, like my legacy SAN and my legacy servers? Yes, you can. You can coexist with your existing infrastructure, which is not the case with hyperconverged infrastructures where you need to sort of port everything into this new environment. Here is just an example of multiple different solutions working in tandem on the same Datum infrastructure. You see here, of course, CentOS with KVM and native bare metal containers. You see Red Hat Rev virtualization, and then you see VMware vSphere running with Citrix and VDI VMs. It's all those different hypervisors and all those different solutions can coexist in the same Datum environment. And the way we do that is we provide complete host isolation between compute nodes. So there's no write between compute nodes. All the reads are local, so that makes it easier to provision and also more predictable service levels. So, I know we're talking about VDI, and we'll move into Zen Desktop specifically here, but it's important to know that the solution can do much more than just VDI. You can actually run very intensive SQL Server workloads, analytics, big data. We have some customers using also for IoT, ingesting a lot of data. So the fault isolation that we have between the compute and data nodes also makes it easier to rebuild data over time when there are failures and so on. I mentioned briefly also the blanket and the encryption, the security that we have. So this is becoming more and more important, especially in verticals where compliance is required, like healthcare and finance as an example. So we do have healthcare customers running VDI on our platform, and they have our blanket encryption enabled. So blanket encryption is the only, as far as I know, is the only solution on the market today that will encrypt data on the host, on the wire, and at rest using the same AES XTS 256 algorithm. So that gives you the confidence that the data is completely encrypted all the way through from the host to the data on the data nodes. And with all the data services included compression, deduplication, erasure coding. There are some solutions out there that will encrypt on the host. There are some solutions that will encrypt on storage. There are others that will do on the wire, but there are no other solution on the market, as far as I'm aware, that will do complete data encryption with data services for the entire platform. So if you are looking at healthcare and finance, I would strongly recommend looking at this as an option. And there are no additional resources required. There's no specific hardware. There's no external key manager required as well. And as performance scales linearly as well. There's of course a minimal impact in enabling. And when I say we don't have knobs and buttons, this is actually the only thing on the platform that you enable and disable, the blanket encryption. And it's an interesting story. This is actually because engineers are afraid that customers might lose the password, the passphrase, and then are able to get to the data. So that's the only reason. So talking about scalability, as I mentioned, it's possible to start with one data node and one compute node. You can bring your own compute node, your own server if you want to. Just need a couple SSDs, and you can add additional servers there, and then you add more capacity as you need. And if you have a VDI environment out there, you probably know that most VMs are very similar, and with data deduplication and compression, the storage requirements are not that huge. And if you look at HCI solutions, every time you add a new compute node, because you need more server capacity, so CPU, you're actually adding more storage as well. You end up with a lot more capacity than you need. So this solution, because it's decoupling compute from capacity and performance, you can grow as you need. You could end up with 32 servers in one data node, as an example, which makes a lot of sense in VDI environments. From a scalability perspective, so some very interesting numbers that we can achieve, up to 128 servers, 18 million IOPS, if 4K random reads, all the reads are local, up to 10 data nodes, 1.7 petabyte effective capacity, and you can grow all the way to 16 gigabytes random write throughput. And VDI is heavily oriented towards writes, as much as 80% in some cases. So being able to cope with the random write is really important. Here is just a graph to show the linear scalability as you add compute nodes. Reads scale linearly, and writes will scale also with servers, but also while adding data nodes to the solution. Now, what is really exciting is we have just been benchmarked by IOMark, which is a standard benchmark, and I'm proud to say that Datrium is the fastest and lower latency storage solution on the market in history. And it's not just by little. We are 5 times faster than the fastest all-flash array, and we are 10 times faster than the highest hyperconverged solution that have been audited, and that solution was actually audited with Optane SSDs from Intel. So it's we are completely changing the market in terms of performance and scalability, and all that with all the data services enabled. Really, really incredible. Chris Mellor, one of the core journalists at the Register, even commented, that this is by far the fastest solution on the market today. The last point that I would like to touch before my colleague Mike McLaughlin start talking about XenDesktop numbers on Datrium is, while many of the deployments are non-persistent and you only need to replicate user data like roaming profiles and some app layers and so on, there are many solutions out there that are using persistent desktops where users do have the ability to deploy the applications inside the desktop and manage the desktop. And in many cases, visual desktops are actually managed just like physical desktops using something like System Center SCCM and so on. If that's the case, we do have the ability to snap and replicate for protection all those desktops across sites with a dynamic policy-based solution. So basically, once you set up a rule, any desktop that comes up with that specific name pattern will be automatically added to this protection group and replicated, and we can reinstantiate all those desktops in your DR site. So when you start talking about business continuity for persistent desktops, that becomes very important. And of course, it's secure, and we do the end-to-end monitoring. So we have another pooling question now.
Yeah, Andre. So, okay, so the question goes, what is your biggest challenge running VDI? Poor performing desktops, or rapid growth in usage, or infrastructure delays, or scalability challenges?
Do we have an option for all of the above? No?
Yeah, none. Yeah.
It looks like a head-to-head race.
But anyways, yeah, we're not seeing anybody voting for the infrastructure delays or scalability challenges.
Yeah, it seems the large majority are have challenges with rapid growth in usage. Okay, so the ability to pay as you go, it's really convenient here. And also the second one is poor performing desktops. That used to be probably the biggest issue with desktops maybe 5, 8 years ago, where the infrastructure was not ready for that, and now it's much easier. Good. So in my last slide, just like to make sure that I touch upon all the things I mentioned here. We are simpler than HCI. No, there's no real cluster administration, no knobs. You can bring your own existing environment. You can coexist with your existing infrastructure. You're able to expand compute independent of capacity, which is critical in VDI environments where not much capacity is needed due to data deduplication and data creation avoidance techniques. Faster than all-flash array, we've proved with IOMark results. You can go actually Google it, you'll see all the results out there. And also we provide an extensive solution for backup and replication with also in the case of business applications with granular application specific recovery. With that, I'd like to invite my colleague Mike McLaughlin to talk a little bit about Zen-Desktop on Datrium, some login VSI results, and how we scale all the way to 6,000 desktops in a single unified platform. Mike?
Great. Thanks, Andre. So you've gotten a kind of a background on what Datrium is doing and what our solution looks like at a high level. What I want to do is take the next 20 minutes or so. I've got a few slides. We've got some slides here and then a couple of demo videos that I want to walk through to kind of show you how simple it is and how we go about building out this solution. So let's kind of jump into some of the details here. All right, we've been talking a little bit about the storage aspect, but this design decision slide that's up here right now actually focuses primarily on the compute side. And this is mainly because of the architecture and the benefits of the DVX solution. So when we look at something like Zen-Desktop on Datrium DVX, all right, the storage aspect, the storage performances, and that was one of the key things that came up in the questions, almost comes off of the table. And part of this is due to the fact we're putting flash on the host. So the active data set, the I/O that the desktop's running on those hosts, the virtual desktop, is local in flash. And so performance almost becomes a moot point. All right, the data node itself that's holding all of the persistent data is well equipped to handle workloads that scale quite a bit here. So most of our testing and most of our sort of architecting and design decisions literally fell back on designing the proper host and understanding the host characteristics so that you could build out these infrastructures. So we have, as an example here, a 28-core, it's a 2-socket by 14-core host that we used as sort of our sample. This was a good mid-range server in today's market. We put enough memory on there to hold the desktop population, and then basically used login VSI to vet out and validate the workloads that we were seeing. So we did a fairly simple knowledge user on these instances to kind of hit the middle of the road. We're going to talk in the details here, but this is essentially a reference point now. So as you start to look at the solutions, you can customize what you need to the user workload. So if it's more than a knowledge user, you might need more horsepower. If it's less, you might get more density. And we had some basic sort of ratios and architecture we're looking at here in how much we were oversubscribing the CPU and the memory on the host, because storage was basically not a consideration for us almost through the entire process because of flash on the host and persistent data shared out on the network. All right, so I want to kind of leave that stop for a minute because this is going to be essential to the scalability aspect that we look at. So as we look at building a solution from just like 100 or so users all the way up to the 6,000 that Andre was talking about, we essentially start with our infrastructure. We need that. We put the data node out there, the persistent data. This is essentially going to hold the data for all of the virtual desktops in the environment, and then we layer vSphere on there and build our desktop cluster, and then this is where XenDesktop layers in. So we basically, these 28 core hosts that I talked about, we're good for about 125 users, knowledge worker users, and we're going to get into how we know that. But using that as a scalability, then 4 of those is 500. If I wanted to increase my environment, I could add 1, 2, 3, I could add 4 more and literally expand out and go to 1,000, all the way up to essentially a 1,500 desktop user level against a single Datrium data node. So now we've done this on the picture here with roughly 12 to 14 servers. The servers that you're using don't necessarily have to be that particular one, but you need to understand the capabilities of that server. So if I had higher performing servers, I might have fewer. If I had lower performing servers, I might have a few more. I could mix and match and move my workload around if I don't have 1,500 exactly the same users as well. So architecturally, we can build out this individual piece here, and then because we have the split provisioning, we can also now add in additional data nodes. So if I wanted to scale out, let's say, to 6,000 users on a single Datrium system, it would essentially be 4 of these pods all the way up to our rack scale solution. Now, we could go to 128 compute nodes on up to 10 data nodes, but we've looked at the architecture and the sizing and what we can get basically out of the configuration, and essentially stopped here at about 6,000 users per sort of bucket of users, and that actually comes across 1 or 2 racks if you were to look at the physical layout of this. So from an architecture perspective, we're focusing in on the servers, we're building those out as sort of building blocks and reference points, attaching them to our data node, building the DVX, the compute node data node component, and essentially scaling out with as many as 1,500 users per single data node and 6,000 per complete DVX system. All right. Now, what does this look like in a XenDesktop environment? All right. So I'm going to basically have a few slides here, and then we'll get into this a little bit more in the actual demo. But it's fairly simple. We're looking at, in this case, machine creation services, where we're going to build all of these virtual desktop instances. All right. And what we want to do is basically get these on to the Datrium. And if we were to simply look, for example, at our environment here, here's 4 hosts in the VMware vSphere environment. They're sharing a data store. In this case, it's called DVX33 Data Store 1, and that happens to be the target for my XenDesktop environment. All right. So gone are the days of building out specific RAID, specific volume groups, specific storage. We basically can present a single data store that is enabled by the data node talking to all those compute nodes, present that data store to the XenDesktop environment, and basically put everything there. All right. So whether I'm looking at sort of the standard storage in the desktop, the private storage, even the user workspace, if I wanted to put file shares on my Datrium solution, I could do that as well. But essentially, all of the desktop data is on the DVX. And in being on the DVX, we get to take advantage of the host flash for servicing the data and the persistent data being on the data node for resiliency, for sharing, for replication to other sites, for security, all of the other things that Andre was talking about earlier in this presentation. All right? So it literally is that simple. Present the host to the data node, create the DVX, you get the shared data store. That becomes the target for everything in your XenDesktop environment. Build up your MCS desktops. You could even do PVS desktops this way if you wanted to. All of the data is going out on the Datrium. Just assign that to the resources inside your XenDesktop environment. It really is that simple. All right. Now, I want to come back now to some of the results and how we got to this. And we use login VSI heavily. I've been working with VDI architectures and solutions for several years now. And I find this is a really valuable tool to help understand sort of parameter changes. So whether I'm looking at task, knowledge, or power users, whether I'm looking at 100, 125, or 150 users per system, how much memory I have, what OS these are kinds of things that we vet out here. And so we essentially build these reference points that we want to make sure that we know what we're pushing into the system, so we make recommendations to our customers. They can expect to get to those levels if they're within the guides of what we're talking about. So in this case, a single host, that 28-core host, was supporting about 125 users. We were pushing it a little higher, a little bit lower, but 125 was the good point where we were essentially at about 90% of system resources. Now, I don't want to build to that level, but I want to know what the capabilities are. Should all of the users be active? Should I have to move some desktops around? If I have to build in some high HA, sort of N+1 availability, I want to know where the thresholds are, and we're going essentially with 125 users per desktop. Now, one of the things that Andre talked about earlier was the host isolation, all right? So not only is the performance coming locally for most of the workload, and we are still storing all of the writes secured and persistent out on the data node, but the hosts don't have to worry about each other. So unlike a hyperconverged environment where the hosts have a lot of sort of sideways discussion about the file systems they're managing and where the data is, we don't see that in the Datrium solution. The host isolation essentially lets me treat each host as another container of resource, of application, of workload. And in this case, we took 4 hosts, put 125 per host, and blocked out 500 users, all right? And we can see here that the graph, this one looks a little denser, but it's essentially on the same line, that dark blue line running through the middle. And I'm going to roll back for a minute to this one, and because I want you to see that between the 960 and the 1280 marks on the left, we're still sitting right there between the 960 and the 1280 marks on the, well, on the left and right peaks of whether it's 125 users on a single host or 500 users on 4 hosts or 1,000 users on 8 hosts. However you push this, where basically each host brings its own workload, brings its own local flash for storage performance, and that was one of the things everyone sort of chimed in on. Was scalability and performance were the 2 key things that the polling question came up with, and we have a way to solve that right now. We can basically bring performance through compute nodes, through the server, and with host isolation, we can scale this relatively independently. All right. One of the things that there are still a couple of storage tasks that an administrator can work around or work with. One of them I mentioned earlier was whether to encrypt the data on the DVX or not. All right, that's something that as a storage admin, as somebody who's managing the infrastructure, you need to make that call of whether you want that data encrypted throughout the DVX environment. One of the other choices that we provide you is how those hosts actually operate, and we provide essentially a fast and insane mode, and yes, that's actually what they're called, fast and insane, and there's a button per host that can be toggled. And the interesting thing here, now for VDI, what we found is the steady state workloads really didn't see any differences between fast and insane. Where it came into sort of effect was when we were doing things like login and boot storms, where the hosts were really getting taxed and there was a very sort of bursty operation. And what we did was some modeling here between basically booting 500 in fast or insane mode. And what you can see is the peaks are relatively close. So the insane mode gets a little bit more. What we're doing in insane mode is we're actually using more of the host CPU resources to service the I/O of the virtual machines on that host. All right, and what we get is lower latencies, tighter windows, higher peaks that we can service. And so for things like login and boot storms and different kinds of applications, you might find that just putting them in insane mode is the way to go. I mean, we actually deliver our compute nodes out of the box in insane mode because we found that it's kind of the ideal way to go. So that is one other choice that you have as an administrator, to tweak the hosts back and forth a little bit. And you'll need to look at the workloads that those hosts are going to be doing. Like I said, with desktops, they worked fine in fast mode, and that kind of does almost an artificial governor. So if you want to make sure you're not hitting certain thresholds regardless of what's going on, and you can wait an extra few seconds for machines to boot, then you have maybe a smoother workload. So it's a choice for you. It's one of the couple of little options left in the solution. All right. So what I'm going to do here is just I want to kind of wrap up for a minute, and then I've got 2 short videos that should take about 10 minutes to get through, and then we can wrap up the session. But what we're seeing is essentially performance is not an issue. we're getting sub-millisecond latency on storage access on local flash on the host. We see consistent performance throughout scalability from one to many hosts through host isolation. We can scale as we need, so if you need another 100 or another 200 users, just add another host or two to the cluster and scale out the compute load. And we've also been looking at this from a cost perspective. And if you step back, certainly that first bit of infrastructure might be something you've got to look at, but as you add more compute power, more hosts, you can literally scale out. What we've done is some rough estimations here. If we look at 500 users over like a 3-year ROI, it comes down to about $9 per month per user to put a virtual desktop in their hands that works this well. All right, and that's kind of something I want to leave you with is a different way of thinking about the economics of providing user desktops as you look at scaling out and servicing the population. Now, for the hardest part of this presentation today, I'm going to switch from PowerPoint to a movie. Bear with me a second. All right, and what I want to do is, so wait till this comes up on the screen. There we go. All right. Oh, hang on. Yeah, let me do that a little bit better. All right. So start this. What we want to do is I had those screenshots earlier where we're basically looking at our Zen desktop environment. And I'm going to make the offer that if what we walk through in this demo here is a little hard to read or you want to see more details, give us a call. We can walk you through a very deep dive live demo with one of our solution engineers. But I want to give you kind of a feel for just how simple and easy this is to set up and go about some of the things. So the Zen desktop environment here, for example, here's our machine catalog. I've got basically this one called Win10 VSI. This one has 300 desktops in it. This could go to 500. Whatever the test is, you're basically deploying everything on this 6U2 private VLAN is the key we're going to look at here. So if I go now to my hosting, that 6U2 private VLAN is one of our internal test beds, all right? And we can see in the address there that it's actually on a VMware VCSA, and the data store here, DVX33 data store. And if I were to look at how this is set up, I basically have all of my artifacts going to this DVX33 data store. It's that simple. When you're setting up the environment, you're setting up the standard or the PVD storage, whatever you want to do, put it on the Datrium data store, and that basically machine catalog or hosting artifact now will take advantage of local flash on the host and stores persistent data out on the Datrium DVX. All right, and I want to take a quick look into the VCSA here for just a minute to show you what this looks like. We essentially have those 4 hosts that are running here. All right, and we can see that these are basically ESX hosts running Zen desktops on top of it. The virtual machines here, the Win10 VSI, we've got the ability inside of Datrium to basically peruse those. We've got our 300 desktops sitting there, and we've got them all sitting out here on the DVX33 data store. So the real key thing here is to just take a quick look at that data store, and there's all of the virtual machines. They're running there. That gives them the advantage of the DVX architecture, all right? So this is a fairly simple, just make sure they're on the Datrium DVX, and you're good to go with the Zen desktop deployment. Not a lot of other storage or system considerations. Make sure the hosts are on the DVX. We're going to look at that in just a minute. And I've got this one other one here, because what I want to do is show you just how simple it is to scale out an environment with the Datrium. So here's a slightly different environment. I've pulled some of my desktop hosts out. So here's another collection where I've got one host, and we can see it's running roughly 127 desktops. This happens to be a Datrium Compute node, like the model number in there. And we can see the 56 logical processors. All right. I have 3 other hosts here sitting outside. I've basically racked and stacked and powered these. I have them ready to go into service. And if I kind of look through these are all Datrium Compute nodes. These are those 28 core hosts I was talking about. All right. So how hard is it to put those into service? That scalability diagram that I showed you earlier. If we look right now, we've got 1 data node, and I've got 5 hosts and about 186 active virtual machines running in my environment. And if I look, there's those 5 hosts. There's 1510, the one that's holding the 127 desktops right now. But if I go over to the administration gear and say add hosts, I can see those 3 hosts that I had sitting out in my environment. And what I want to do now is basically through the DVX user interface, I got a couple of blue buttons I got to press here. This is one, all right? And we've sped this up a little bit. We basically cut about a minute out of the time. But what's happening right now is we're installing the DVX software on each of those 3 hosts and making them Datrium compatible. And we're going to see now that it comes back up and says, hey, I've found some local flash drives on those hosts, and I've selected by default the 2 of them here. These are Datrium Compute nodes. I've got a couple of extra here that are unchecked that I could use later. But basically, the SSDs on those hosts get selected essentially as the local flash for that particular host storage. Click the next blue button. We're going to go off. It's going to configure the SSDs and essentially mount that DVX data store. All right? It really is that simple. Add hosts to your vCenter cluster, introduce them to Datrium by adding hosts, and now we see that they're in our list here. Now notice some of these aren't doing much work. They got blank lines on them because we haven't deployed anything to them yet. But if I go back to my hosts and clusters, I'm going to slide these up into that desktop cluster so that it gets acknowledged by my hosting group or whatever I've attached this to, because I'm pointing to that desktop internal cluster here. It now has 4 hosts in it instead of 1. It still has the 127 virtual machines in there, but I can see now I have plenty of room to spread out workload or to scale up. I could basically go in and say, provision 350 more desktops into this pool, into this desktop collection of hosts, and continue on. So if I wanted to add 1 more host, 2 more hosts, it really is that simple. And at the end of the day, we have this 1 data node. Now we have 8 hosts, 3 more hosts that we just added. We still have our 186 virtual machines, but now we're ready to basically scale out and add more virtual machines or spread out the workload of what we already have. So as you look at it, it really is a compute node aspect of what we're trying to do with VDI. Storage concerns, storage performance concerns are basically, we feel, off the table with local host flash. All right, that's it. Let's switch back to the last bit here. We just did the demo, and now open it up for any Q&A from the audience. We've got our windows open here, and we can also take some questions if they come in.
Sure. So we have a few questions. Thanks for the wonderful presentation by Andre and Mike. The first question goes, can I mix other non-VDI workloads on the same DVX system with the Zen desktop solution?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were focused today on Zen Desktop and how to look at building and scaling and how we sized that. But there was a slide Andre covered a little earlier today with mixed workloads. So each host doesn't worry about the other ones essentially in the environment. So I could put SQL or file shares or some other workloads, and they would essentially store their persistent data on the data node, and they would manage their local workloads from local flash, independent of the hosts that are supporting virtual desktops. So absolutely, you can mix and match in an environment.
Thanks, Mike. The next one is, what are the main differences between Datrium compute nodes and third-party compute nodes?
That's actually Datrium compute nodes are bought from us. That's the first one. Third-party compute nodes are servers that you may have in your inventory already, or servers that you may be buying from your preferred server vendor. They are both capable of running the DVX software. They both will have local flash drives on them to host the storage workload. The key thing is we can mix and match those as well. So in an environment where I have existing servers, or I might want to buy something new, or let's say the Datrium compute node doesn't meet my criteria. I want something either with more memory or different cards in it or something. I'm free to go out and buy those from another server manufacturer, bring them in, and add them to the DVX environment. So at the core, they're just servers to us. Where you source them, what they have on them, the openness, that's part of the open converged platform that we're talking about here. So third party and DVX, Datrium compute nodes, very similar, slightly different acquisition.
Thank you, Mike. The third one is, how can I protect the desktop infrastructure with DVX?
Okay, I don't think we had enough time to get into that today in detail, but built into the DVX is a fundamental replication. Snapshots and replication. We talked about it a little bit about moving data offsite. Built into the DVX platform is the ability to essentially take snapshots of your core infrastructure, user data, desktop images. You can store those locally or even replicate those to another DVX system if you wanted to. So there are built-in mechanisms for conveniently protecting the data as well.
Thank you. So considering the time, we'll have the last question now. When do I need to scale capacity or data node versus performance or a compute node?
It's funny, I think that question almost answers itself. So if I need more storage, if I need more persistent capacity, our data nodes have a particular architecture. The specs are out on our website. So if I need more storage capacity, either for snapshots or user data or application data, I'll need to scale capacity that way. If I need more performance, if I need to service more workloads, more users, more applications, it's very likely that I'll need more servers to do that. So we can scale servers independently of the storage that's in the system. So it kind of depends on, we can basically get to literally terabytes of data, almost to hundreds of terabytes of data in the architecture. And if there was a slide earlier, we could go to 128 servers or up to 10 data nodes. And where you decide really is, do I need more horsepower or do I need more storage? And I don't have to make those decisions together anymore.
Okay. Thank you. So thanks, Andrew and Mike, for the webinar and walking us through these points where we see how Datrium helps us in these features. So before we conclude, is there any final note that you would like to share with our audience?
This is Andre here. So I don't know if you already have a VDI solution in your data center. I've been dealing with VDI and app remoting architectures for many years. I saw the hard times that people had with SAN in scaling. Initially deploying few desktops is fine. Moving forward, it starts to get very tricky, especially from a performance perspective. I've been also in the HCI industry. I've seen the challenges with not being able to decouple capacity from performance and having to end up with petabytes of data for VDI deployments when you only need maybe terabytes. This solution from a VDI and app remoting perspective, it definitely delivers what you need in your data center from scalability, from a reliability, and also from a cost perspective for deploying Citrix. If you're interested, reach out to us, and I'm more than happy to take you through a POC or a demo and talk more about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. So thanks, Andre and Mike, again for the webinar. And as we mentioned earlier, we will be posting this recording post this webinar. And as Andre was also mentioning, that you could always reach out to us for any questions that you're looking for answer for. And you could also visit our Citrix Ready website, citrixready.citrix.com, to see the compatibility, the Citrix compatibility with Datrium products. Okay. So thanks again, everyone, for joining the webinar today. And with this said, we are concluding the webinar. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.